Planter President, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past President, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcements for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Prince Ella McCormick Youngblood of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. George Arthur Sims, Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Danielle Myers Bateman of DeSoto, Georgia. The family of Mr. Charles Leon Gaddy, Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Willeen Kimball Kennedy of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, age 55, of 509 Mary Street, Americus, Georgia, died Sunday, May 23rd at the Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital main campus in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, age 55, was held Tuesday, June 1st, graveside at the Eastview Cemetery in Americus, Georgia. Bishop Melvin McCluster, pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Dorothy Jean Kinchin Floyd of Americus, Georgia. His beloved children, Miss Kanisha Cooper and Miss Shaquai Mike, both of Americus, Georgia. Miss Keitha Mike of Warner Robins, Georgia. His beloved grandchildren, his loving and devoted mother, Mother Evelyn Clark Floyd of Americus, Georgia. His beloved father, Mr. Otha Lee Floyd, and his wife, Mrs. Lorene Floyd of Americus, Georgia. His beloved sisters, Mrs. Tammy Floyd Wright and her husband, Mr. Lawrence Wright, Miss Teresa Floyd, Miss Christina Boynton, and Mrs. Ann Millage, all of Americus, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Robert James Floyd and his wife, Mrs. Tamisha Floyd of Newtonville, New Jersey, Mr. Claiborne Boynton, Mr. Otis Lee Floyd, and Mr. Clayton Burns, all of Americus, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Mary Clark, Mrs. Annie Ruth Cross, Miss Cassie Floyd, Miss Clara Floyd, Mr. Walter Lee Floyd, and Mr. Frank Floyd, all of Americus, Georgia. His beloved sisters-in-law, Mrs. Danny Mae Kinchin and Mrs. Loretta Kitchens of Americus, Georgia, Miss Luana Ross of Plains, Georgia, and Mrs. Barbara Bess and our husband, Mr. Tony Bess of Columbia, South Carolina. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, age 55, of 709 Mary Street, Americus, Georgia. Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams, age 57, of 144 West Bailey Street, Leslie, Georgia, died Wednesday, May 26, at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams, age 57, was held Tuesday, June 1st, graveside at the Piney Grove Baptist Church No. 3 Cemetery in Lee County, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Glenn M. Bryant, Sr., pastor of the County Line Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Marquise S. Williams of Newcastle, Indiana, Mr. Michael D. Williams of Atlanta, Georgia, and Miss LaCrissa Gail Williams of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved grandchildren, Michaela, Javen, Anaya, Nakia, Tangela, Dre, Adriana, Cameron, Camera, Samaya, and Chandler. One beloved great-grandchild, Navi. Her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Gussie L. Jackson and her husband, Mr. Andrew Jackson of Americus, Georgia, Miss Patricia D. Lassiter of Leslie, Georgia, and Mrs. Carolyn L. Bonner and her husband, Mr. James Bonner of Albany, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. James L. Lassiter and his wife, Mrs. Linda Lassiter of Florida, Mr. Leon Lassiter and his wife, Mrs. Cynthia Lassiter of Albany, Georgia, and Mr. Willie C. Lassiter of St. Paul, Minnesota. Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Annie L. Lassiter of Americus, Georgia. A beloved aunt, Mrs. Catherine Fletcher of Americus, Georgia, and Miss Essie Mitchell of Flint, Michigan. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams, age 57, of 144 West Bailey Street, Leslie, Georgia. Mrs. Prince Ella McCormick Youngblood, age 73, of 049 Cemetery Road, Rochelle, Georgia, died Tuesday, May 25, 2021, at her residence in Rochelle, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Prince Ella McCormick Youngblood, age 73, was held Wednesday, June 2nd, graveside at the Springfield Baptist Church Cemetery in Abbeville, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Henry Hall, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Willie Youngblood Sr. of Rochelle, Georgia. Her loving and devoted children, Mr. Willie B. Youngblood Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Sandra Youngblood of Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. Calvin Youngblood and his wife, Mrs. Kathy Youngblood of Pitts, Georgia. And Mrs. Teresa M. Alexander and her husband, Mr. Tony Alexander of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved and devoted grandchildren, Miss Brittany Alexander, Mr. Tony Alexander Jr., Mrs. Rashad Harris and her husband, Mr. Kenya Harris, Mrs. Keandra Ferguson, Mrs. Ayana Youngblood, Mr. Jared Lindsay, Ms. Chantel Leggett, Mrs. Kanisha Grace and her husband, Mr. Victor Grace, Mr. Calvin Youngblood and his wife, Mrs. Portia Youngblood, Mr. Roderick Grace, Mrs. Tony Smith and her husband, Mr. Antonio Smith, 14 beloved great-grandchildren, one beloved sister, Mrs. Lily Mae Bradley of Orlando, Florida, 4 beloved brothers, Mr. Jeremiah McComrick and his wife, Mrs. Ida McComrick, Mr. Nehemiah McComrick and his wife, Mrs. Rosa McComrick of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. David McComrick of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mr. Cleotha McComrick of Overthorpe, Georgia. A host of aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, a very special friend, Mrs. Gloria Hunt, and many other relatives and many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Prince Ella McComrick Youngblood, age 73, of 049 Cemetery Road, Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. George Arthur Sims Jr., age 52, of 508 Pineview Drive, Americus, Georgia, died Friday, May 28th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. George Arthur Sims Jr., age 52, was held Wednesday, June 2nd, at the Poplar Springs Cemetery in Preston, Georgia. The Reverend George F. Muntz Jr., pastor of the Whole Truth International Ministries of Americus, Georgia, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Angela M. Sims of Americus, Georgia, his loving and devoted children, Mrs. Angelica Sims, Ms. Brittany Sims, both of Americus, Georgia, a beloved stepson, Mr. Christopher Adam Layfield of Richmond Hill, Georgia, 3 beloved grandchildren, a beloved father, his beloved father, Mr. George A. Sims Sr. of Plains, Georgia, his loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Leanne Sims of Plains, Georgia, Mrs. Diane Ross and her husband, Mr. Thomas Ross, and Mrs. Patricia Tooks and her husband, Brother Raymond Tooks of Americus, Georgia, Mrs. Miriam Laster of Atlanta, Georgia, a beloved brother, Mr. Kelvin Sims of Plains, Georgia, his beloved aunt and uncle, Mr. Sam Sims and Mr. Eugene Sims, both of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Annie O. Durham of Plains, Georgia. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. George Arthur Sims Jr., age 52, of 508 Pineview Drive, Americus, Georgia. Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell, age 20, better known as Four-Way Lil Man, of 305 North 11th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, May 27th, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. The funeral service for Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell, better known as Four-Way Lil Man, age 20, was held Saturday, June 5th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. His beloved grandfather, Elder Alonzo Johnson, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Mr. Kinka Y. Johnson of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved stepfather, Mr. Keldridge Glenn of Cordele, Georgia, his loving sister, Mrs. Chastity Miller of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved brother, Mr. Jaquavius Campbell Mr. Jamario Chambliss, Mr. Cameron Davis, Mr. Sir Gabriel Patrick, Mr. Zaquavius Harmon, Mr. Zymoria Jackson, and Mr. Jordan Glenn, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved grandmother, Mrs. Debbie Walker Clark, and her husband, Mr. Charles Clark of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved grandfather, Elder Lonzo Johnson, and his wife, Mrs. Diane Johnson of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved great-grandmother, Mother Helen Davis of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncle, Mr. Alonzo Johnson, Mr. Jonathan Johnson, Miss Alexis Jackson, Mr. Adravian Clark of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Courtney Johnson, and Miss Brandon Johnson of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved great-aunts and great-uncles, Miss Denise Walker, Miss Cynthia Waters, Miss Latrell Morris, and her husband, Mr. Ronnie Morris, Pastor David Johnson Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Cynthia Johnson, and Mr. James Cook of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Stacy Murray and her husband, Sean Murray of Macon, Georgia, Mr. Bruce Walker and his wife, Mrs. Belle Walker of Columbus, Georgia, Mr. Rodney Taylor and his wife, Mrs. Teresa Taylor of Byram, Georgia. A host of cousins, to include Miss Sonia Gaines and Mr. Tawana Gaines of Cordele, Georgia, a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include his four-way crew, survived Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell, age 20, better known as Four-Way Little Man, of 305 North 11th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Deacon S. Danielle Myers Bateman, age 40, of 104 Mill Street, DeSoto, Georgia, died Tuesday, June 1st, at her residence in DeSoto, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon S. Danielle Myers Bateman, age 40, was held Saturday, June 5th, graveside at the New Zion Baptist Church Cemetery in Cobb, Georgia. The Reverend Willie Green, pastor of the Forest Chapel Baptist Church, officiated. The Reverend Jesse Watts, pastor of the New Zion Baptist Church. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband of 17 years, Deacon James Bateman, 3 loving children, Ms. Jemiah Bateman, Ms. Jasmine Bateman, and Ms. Jamil Bateman, all of DeSoto, Georgia. Her beloved father, Mr. Lee Ernest Myers Sr., and his wife, Mrs. Daphne Myers of Albany, Georgia. 2 beloved brothers, Mr. Lee Ernest Myers Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Nina Myers of Smyrna, Georgia. Mr. Daniel Myers of DeSoto, Georgia. Her beloved grandmother, Mother Addie B. Cutts of DeSoto, Georgia. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Gwendolyn Bateman Bradley of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved father-in-law, Mr. James Larkin Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Linda Larkin of Albany, Georgia. Her grandmother-in-law, Mrs. Louise Rowland of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved sisters-in-law, Mrs. Lakeitha Bateman, Ms. Mary Bateman, Ms. Tanyalyn Jackson, all of Atlanta, Georgia. Ms. Portia Bradley, Ms. Cecilia Goodman, Ms. Tawana Edwards, and Mrs. Jamirica Battle, all of Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Kenya Barrington of Albany, Georgia. Her beloved uncles, Deacon James D. Cutts of DeSoto, Georgia, Mr. Antonio Cutts of California, Mr. Clyde Larkins and his wife, Mrs. Shanita Larkin, Mr. Merrick Larkin and his wife, Mrs. Valerie Larkins, Mr. Alvin Bateman, and Mr. Ernest Lewis and his wife, Mrs. Joey Lewis, all of Americus, Georgia. Mr. Marcus Bateman and his wife, Mrs. Melissa Bateman of Leesburg, Georgia. Mr. Hurley Myers Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Sandra Myers of Smithfield, Georgia. Mr. Whippy Myers of Frankfort, Kentucky. Mr. Melvin Myers and his wife, Mrs. Tracy Myers of Fremont, California. And Mr. Marvin Myers and his wife, Mrs. Deborah Myers of Albany, Georgia. Her beloved aunts, Mrs. Agatha James and her husband, Mr. Kelvin James. Mrs. Sharonda Lundy Ross of Americus, Georgia. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, great uncles, great aunts, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include a devoted aunt, Ms. Edna Bateman of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Doretha Didell, and Mrs. Rosemary Jones of Leslie, Georgia. Survived Deacon S. Daniel Myers Bateman, age 40, 104 Mill Street, DeSoto, Georgia. Mr. Charles Leon Gaddy Jr., age 49, 116 Robin Drive, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, May 30th at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include his beloved son, Master King Gaddy, and Master Cody Gaddy of Cordele, Georgia. His loving mother, Mrs. Carol Carruthers of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Robert Gaddy of Cordele, Georgia. A host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Charles Leon Gaddy Jr., age 49, 116 Robin Drive, Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Willeen Kimball Kennedy, age 81, of 1613 Stewart Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, June 3rd, at her residence in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Louis J. Kennedy of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted children, Mr. Andre Barlow and his wife, Mrs. Cynthia Barlow of San Diego, California. Mr. Eric Kennedy, Mr. Lindsay Kennedy, Mr. Louis Kennedy Jr., and Mr. Terrell Kennedy, all of Ohio. Her beloved grandchildren, Miss Adrian Barlow of Jacksonville, Florida, Miss Jasmine Barlow, and Miss Sadie Barlow, both of San Diego, California. Her beloved nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Willeen Kimball Kennedy, age 81, of 1613 Stewart Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Again, the family of Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Prince Ella McCormick Youngblood of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. George Arthur Sims Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deacon S. Danielle Myers Bateman of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mr. Charles Leon Gaddy Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Willeen Kimball Kennedy of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Mother Mary Thelma Solomon, age 92, of 105 James Avenue, Americus, Georgia, died Friday, June 4, at the Phoebus Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Minister Catherine Sims, Mrs. Josephine Reese Johnson, Mrs. Lena M. Thomas, Deacon Jesse W. Durham, and Mr. Rayford Solomon, all of Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Evelyn Davis and her husband, Deacon James E. Davis of Leesburg, Georgia, and Mr. Roosevelt Solomon and his wife, Mrs. Linda Solomon of Atlanta, Georgia. A beloved daughter-in-law, Mrs. Georgia Solomon of Americus, Georgia. A host of loving and devoted grandchildren, two of whom she reared, Miss Pamela M. Daniels of Lawrenceville, Georgia, and Miss Shamika Davis of Jacksonville, Florida. A host of great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mother Mary Thelma Solomon, age 92, of 105 James Avenue, Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Mary Thelma Solomon, age 92, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter, age 85, of 46 Carter Lane, Hatley Community, Cordele, Georgia, died early Saturday morning, June 5th, 2021, at her residence in Hatley, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Henry Carter of Cordele, Georgia, her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Edna Stanley of Tampa, Florida, Mr. Freddie Carter and his wife, Mrs. Eva Carter of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Charles Carter of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Alonzo Carter and his wife, Mrs. Betty Carter, and Mrs. Linda Gibson and her husband, Mr. Raymond Gibson of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Norris Carter and his wife, Mrs. Tammy Carter of Tifton, Georgia, 10 beloved grandchildren, a host of great-grandchildren, 2 special nieces, Miss Pearl, Miss May Pearl, and Miss Bessie Floyd, a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter, age 85, of 46 Carter Lane, Hatley Community, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter, age 85, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mother Oris Worth, age 93, of 106 Foster Street, DeSoto, Georgia, died late Saturday evening, June 5th, at her residence in DeSoto, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Oris Worth, age 93, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for our announcements. The New Poplar Spring Baptist Church extends you a very cordial invitation to worship with them today during their worship service that begins at 9:45 a.m. You may join them via conference call by calling 253-993-3761. 253-993-3761. Pastor Johnny Dean and the members of New Poplar Spring extend you a cordial invitation to worship with them. You're invited to worship at the Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church today. Their conference call schedule is as follows. Sunday morning worship service begins at 9 o'clock a.m. Tuesday, midday prayers at 12 o'clock noon. Thursday, prayer meeting and Bible studies is held at 6 o'clock p.m. The conference call-in number is 229-329-7611. 229-329-7611. Mother Lucille Shazer, Church Mother. Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Chairman of Deacons. Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. You're invited to pull up and praise with the Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church today during their morning worship service, which begins at 10:30 a.m. Pastor Greg Williams and the members of Emmanuel extend you a very cordial invitation to worship with them. They're located at 1818 U.S. Highway 41 North. They invite you to come and have a worship experience with them today. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church will have worship service on the grounds of the church today, Sunday, June 6th. Sunday school begins at 10 o'clock a.m. Morning worship begins at 10:30 a.m. The service will also be carried online with the dial-in number by calling 515-604-9745. 515-604-9745. The access code is 288180. Deacon Joe Wedges is the chairman of deacons. Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. You're invited to worship at the Gethsemane Baptist Church today in their outdoor worship service today. On the grounds of the church. The service will begin this morning at 10:30 a.m. Each of you have a cordial invitation to worship with the members of the Gethsemane Baptist Church. Deacon Johnny Wilson is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Cecil Strawler is the pastor. You're invited to worship with the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today on Facebook Live during their worship service today. Church Without Walls will be on Facebook Live today. You have a very cordial invitation to worship with them at 10:30 a.m. this morning. Deacon Leon Spears is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the pastor. As we continue with community announcements, we would also like to remind you that the Spring Hill Baptist Church extends you a cordial invitation to worship with them today in their drive-up and worship service, which begins at 11 o'clock a.m. Sister Mary Ann Lewis is the secretary. Deacon Sam Anderson is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Choice Cobb Sr. is the pastor. Christ Chapel Unadilla will have a weekly food pantry that is open every Wednesday from 3 until 6 o'clock p.m. You're invited to come and stop by Christ Chapel Unadilla weekly food pantry that is open every Wednesday from 3 until 6 p.m. Ms. Jeanette Taylor is the reporter. There will be a pre-Father's Day gospel singing on Saturday, June 19th at 4 o'clock p.m. on the lawn at 302 West 16th Avenue, Cordial, next to Robinson's Barbershop. On program will be the Gospel Travelers of Oakfield, Chosen of Albany, Truly Blessed of Albany, and Brother Norris Mathis and others. Everyone has a very cordial invitation to worship and be a part of the worship experience. The Vote, Vaccine, and Vision Tour for Cordele and Crisp County will be held on Tuesday, June 8th from 12 o'clock noon to 7 o'clock p.m. This is free and open to the public. The event will be held at Reed Park, 802 Jones Avenue, Cordele, from 12 until 7 o'clock p.m. Fort Valley State University Mobile Information Technology Center will be available. From 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock, health insurance enrollment at little to no cost for most individuals and voter registration. From 2:30 to 3:30 p.m., faith-based power hour. All clergy of all faith are welcome to attend. And from 6 until 7 o'clock p.m., there will be a town hall meeting to learn how to get more federal resources for Cordele and Crisp County. Free food will be available, a bouncy house for kids, and the game station, Georgia, will be there. Bring your lawn chairs and your blanket. For more information, you may contact Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown at 404-884-3499. Again, you're reminded, if you have not received your COVID-19 vaccine, it is available. Please do everything you can to get your vaccine during this time. Again, the MD White's Medical Institute, located at 401 North 15th Street, the former A.S. Clark School, is conducting and will be giving both Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccination. You are invited to give them a call to get their schedule for this week. And remember, adult children ages 18 and up who get vaccinated can come by and be vaccinated at that location. Again, we thank you. That concludes our announcements for today. We remind you of our FEMA funeral assistance for COVID-19 related deaths. If you have not reached out to the FEMA for the information, please remember that you can call 844-684-6333. Hours of operation are Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 8 o'clock p.m. Gather funeral expense documentations, official death certificates for COVID-19 listed, confirming COVID death occurred in the United States and the U.S. territories. For all families who were served by the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you have received a packet of information that will help you in your quest to get this application completed. Remember that number again is 844-684-6333. You're reminded to reach reach out to the Chris County School Nutrition Program for information concerning the free lunch program that's scheduled that they will be sharing with you as they're preparing to conduct our free lunch program throughout the Chris County, throughout the summer months of this school year.
And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of Deacon O.C. Smith, better known as Deacon Bud Smith, who would have celebrated his birthday June 3rd. Dedication requested by his beloved and devoted wife, Mother Leela May Smith, and all of the children and all of the members of the Zion Hope Baptist Church of Winona, Georgia, where he served as chairman of the Board of Deacons for many, many years. Our dear friend and brother and father figure, Deacon O.C. Smith, better known as Deacon Bud Smith, gone and never will be forgotten. Our dedication is in loving memory of Miss Martha Ann Solomon, who departed this life June 1st, 2010. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, and niece. Gone but not forgotten, Mrs. Martha Ann Solomon, well-known church musician in this community. In loving memory of Mrs. Maxine Levant Smith, who would have celebrated her birthday June 7th. Dedication comes from her children and the Levant and Brown families. Gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: happy 15th anniversary to Mr. Willie and Mrs. Betty James Walker, who celebrated their anniversary Thursday, June 3rd. Dedication requested by the James and Walker family. God bless your union and keep it strong. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: happy birthday to Mrs. Tanya Applin Ray, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, June 7th. Dedication requested by Mr. Frederick Applin and Mrs. Mary Bynes and the entire family. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Mrs. Willie Mae Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia; Ms. Lucille Hillman and family of Ashburn, Georgia; Ms. Willie Mae Crapp and family; Mrs. Martha A. Cross and family; Deacon and Mrs. Dan Colson and family; Mr. Johnny and Mrs. Barbara Dennis and family; Mrs. Lucille McGill and families; Gwen Westbrook and family; Deacon Sammy and Mrs. Shanice McGill and family; Deacon George and Mrs. Ann Whitehead and family; Ms. Geraldine Harvey and family; Deacon Eugene and Mrs. Deborah Williams and family; Mrs. Lenora McGill and family; Mr. Dravian and Mrs. Kathy McGill and family; Mrs. Jerry Grant and family; Ms. Mary Thomas and family; Ms. Brenda Webb and family; Ms. Betty Webb and family; Mr. Warner Webb and family; Mr. Travis Webb and family; Ms. Doris Wise and family; Mr. Johnny and Mrs. Juanita Tarbert and family; the Reverend and Mrs. Layfield Buckholz and family; Miss Lucy Baker and family; Mrs. Mary Trahan and family; Mother Lucille Shazer, age 108, church mother of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church; Deacon Dave Chambliss and family; Mr. and Mrs. Jamie Chambliss and family; the John L. Cobb family; Mr. Stuart Charlie Henry and family of Byronville, Georgia; Mother Adeline Lofton and family of Araby, Georgia; Mrs. Mattie Mays and family; Mrs. Lee Dotis Butts and family of Leesburg, Georgia; Deacon Lonnie Clayton and family; Mrs. Brenda Redden and family; Mr. Freddie Bimmer and family; Mrs. Viola M. Adams and family; Mrs. Lim Wright and family; Mrs. Lynette Ross and family; Mrs. Jean Oliver Burks in memory of Mother Ida Rose Oliver, gone but not forgotten; Deacon Sammy, Mrs. Fanny Mumford and family; Mr. Charlie and Mrs. Ruby Jean Ross and family; Mrs. Cheryl Allen Young and family; Dr. Bobby G. West and Mrs. Melba West and family; Mrs. Christine Anderson and family, retired educator Ms. Margaret Jordan and family, Vienna, Georgia, Ms. Hilda Ray and family, Mr. Terry Boston and family, Dr. Christopher West and family, Minister Sharonda Towns and family, Mrs. Shireen James and family. Our first selection for this morning.
Home is not yours, but you got a home somewhere. Come on. Just love you more. Weary days down here. I'll be going back to live with him. His word is not all. I won't have to worry no. Making
I'd like to thank Brother Kelvin Pless in Americus, Georgia, and the Mary Gospel Workshop for providing us with our selection for this morning. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mother Mary Thelma Solomon, age 92, 105 James Avenue, Americus, Georgia, died Friday, June 4th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Thelma Solomon, age 92, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter, age 85, of 46 Carter Lane, Hatley Community, Cordele, Georgia, died early Saturday morning, June 5th, 2021, at her residence in Hatley, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter, age 85, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mother Oris Worth, age 93, 106 Foster Street, DeSoto, Georgia, died late Saturday evening, June 5th, at her residence in DeSoto, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Oris Worth, age 93, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams funeral directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our next and final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Sanford Floyd, better known as Mickey, of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Gwendolyn Gail Lassiter Williams of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Prince Ella McCormick Youngblood of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. George Arthur Sims Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mr. Javon DeQuay Campbell, better known as Four-Way Little Man of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deaconess Danielle Myers Bateman of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mr. Charles Leon Gaddy Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Willeen Kimball Kennedy of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mother Mary Thelma Solomon of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Edna May Heath Carter of Hatley, Georgia. The family of Mother Oris Worth of DeSoto, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, goes out to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker, who received his second shot of COVID vaccine. Thank God for that. This selection goes out to my sister, Mrs. Maddie Mae Johnson, better known as Sister Girl, and Mrs. Patsy Jackson and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, to his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter and family of Vienna, Georgia, and their grandson, Noah, and family. This selection goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, and goes out to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, and to his wife, Sister Kathy Williams of Albany, Georgia, and goes out to the mother of our church again, Mother Lucille Shazer, age 108. Yes, age 108. This selection goes out to our chairman, Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. and Sister Gradine Ford and family. This selection goes out to my neighbor, Mrs. Theron Jones and family, the entire Jones and Talbot family, Mrs. Dorothy Talbot and family, Mr. Johnny and Mrs. Juanita Talbot and family, the entire Talbot family. This selection goes out to Mrs. To each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. Remember, in your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.